Now,
so it is not
a very interesting scenario and background you've painted for us. My apologies there for cutting in the middle of that conversation of your statement. You've laid the background for us locally and give us some scenarios from other developing countries around the world. And that's a very interesting book you're talking about there. I wish you read that one day. But again, we've tried to ban everything in this country, from rice to chicken to turkey to everything. And we've seen not to be able to hold any of this down. Now, interest rates, FX, currency, naira, dollar, whatever, is very key this time. So you talked about the fact that the central bank didn't want to offend the World Trade Organization. So what makes this particular approach on the ban on 41 items different from an economic point of view? You're beginning to say that this looks very good on the book, but then the Nigerians still believe we don't have enough capacity to produce some of these things locally. Why ban them from FX market in the first place?
Yes, the major reason, at that time was to conserve reserves. You could also say, by extension, to promote the local production. If you recall, in 2015, at one point, the crude oil price fell to as low as below $30 per barrel, and our reserves were depleting dangerously to a point where the country was in danger of not even being able to finance 3 months of imports, which is the threshold for gauging solvency, country's solvency. So the CBN didn't have a choice, in my view, to intervene, from the demand side, knowing full well that it was a hamstrung when it comes to, doing something about the supply. In the supply, the much they could do was to prioritize the supply of forex to critical sectors. But from the demand side, what was available to them was to restrict, access to forex. If the CBN had not done that, of course, it would have impacted negatively on foreign reserves, and possibly by now we wouldn't be talking about the over $30 billion in reserves that we have. So it was important that was done. And as I said, we have seen the spin-off effects in local production. Local producers today are, gradually gaining their market share. But I also feel that CBN should try to consolidate on these gains.
Very interesting you're talking about consolidation, and I like that. That's where we're going next in terms of outlook. Now, the central bank is trying to save foreign exchange, but what do you think the federal government should do as a bigger umbrella policy focus to ramp up and assist the central bank in this regard? Don't forget that the central bank is pumping money into some of these sectors like agriculture to also help. That's on one side. Then we talk about consolidation. Do you think we should ban more items from the FX market, or we should reopen the 41 items? What are your views along these core questions?
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm happy you mentioned the federal government role there. Again, from theory, there's a work by Mohamed Arian. Mohamed Arian, one of the renowned economists, he did a book on the only game in town, where the only game in town centered around central banks, where he talked about the role of central banks in helping economies, out of a recession, but that role has limits. That the CBN, of course, the tools available to the CBN are limited. That fiscal policies must complement monetary policies in ramping up production. If you ask these local producers, for example, they will tell you their challenges. The major challenge that is staring in the face of a local producer today is infrastructure. And infrastructure is what the government should fix, mainly power, transport. If you look at the National Bureau of Statistics reports on inflation, now it talks about core inflation. In this, the recent figure that was released, you notice that unlike previous months this year, core inflation, actually increased. while food inflation dropped marginally. So that also speaks to the need to fix infrastructure. And part of why we have increase in the core inflation index is because of the high cost of transport. The major drivers of inflation in Nigeria remain structural, and that's why fiscal policy has to come in. So we need to fix power, we need to fix transport infrastructure, from the fiscal side. And from the monetary side too, the CBN should look into the high interest rates at the cost of borrowing, because that is now the challenge. Is there a way, for example, that the CBN could adopt maybe discriminatory pricing in terms of loanable funds? Is it possible for some of these items that are prioritized to assess funds at single digits, even below 9%, not necessarily going through commercial banks? With development banks are there, the Bank of Industry, the Bank of Agriculture, and in the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, these banks, there's a provision to recapitalize them. We have to move fast to recapitalize them, and much of these interventions should go through development banks as opposed to going through deposit money banks, because of the way they're profit-oriented, they are structured. Many of these local producers talk about bottlenecks they face, trying to assess these funds from commercial banks.
Dr. Waleke,
this ongoing UN meeting, General Assembly meeting, remember Donald Trump said something, that as the president of the U.S., he was going to put the interest of the U.S. first. And he was also encouraging other leaders in various countries to also put the interest of their countries first. Okay. So that is what import substitution
Dr.
is all about.
And Dr. Waleke, I think,
yes.
If I may respectfully cut in there, I have to put the interest of our viewers first, if you permit me. We thank you for your time today. Let's continue this conversation some other time. And you academics are full of what to hear. And we love your coming on the program today. We thank you so much, Uche Waleke, Associate Professor, Banking and Finance at the National State University. My apologies there. Due to time, we need to cut off that conversation. Of course, the import substitution conversation will continue. Some folks still voting for and some against. But let's leave that there for another day. Let's come back to the market when we return.